Hi, my name's Tom, and I want to share about a premise for a video game called Body Swap: Will to Live. And so the premise for the game, the idea is that an old person might want to swap bodies with a young person so they could live longer, and that there are some young people who might be happy to get moved ahead to the finish line and not have so much pressure on them. That just came up with some in conversation with some friends, talking about how some people are 80 years old and they're really going for it still. They're waking up every day and they're trying their hardest and they're doing it. And there's some younger people in their 40s and their 20s who have just given up on life and they just don't have the juice. I am laughing because I'm thinking of my friend that I was talking about this with, and I won't say his name because he's terrified to be known publicly outside of his professional role, so I won't say any more about him. But we were talking about an old guy that he plays pickleball with, Will, and Will is I don't know how old Will is, 80 years old or something. He looks really good. He's probably not 80 because he looks like he's in his 60s, but he's at least 70 years old, I think. And he's playing pickleball every day and eating healthy and investing and loves life, while my friend is just counting down the days till retirement. And we're talking about, this is not to obviously make fun of my friend. We're just joking around, but he's talking about I'm just, I've already given up. I'm just waiting for my body to give up. And we're like, oh yeah, that's funny. What if you could switch people like that? An old guy like Will, who really just wishes he had another 80 years to live or a young body to keep doing all this stuff in. And then those young people who are like, man, I don't like the pressure of the modern world. I wish I could just not have any expectations and go right to being an old person. Again, not to say anything bad about old people either, you know what I mean? But if I could just skip right ahead to the part where I can do whatever I want and there's no expectations and I could sit in a recliner all day and watch TV, because that's what I really want to do now at the age of 25 or something, that would be a good trade. And so we were talking about this idea and I was like, I'd love to do something with this idea. And then it came to me, this might make for a great game. And I'm trying to picture this game and we're talking about it. And when you start to think about it, there's all these cool scenarios that could come up. It gets a little dicey. It can get a little dicey. But, just running through some basic scenarios, of course, is just like an old guy. Let's take like a Warren Buffett, somebody who is old but really still sharp and motivated, and say he could find somebody much younger and say, let's swap bodies and I'll take care of your whole family. You don't have to have the pressure of being a provider. Nothing like that. You become old, set up the trust fund for your family, and I'll take your young body, and then we're good, Of course, there is the young person who's like, it's a little dark, I know, forgive me, but maybe a young person who isn't really stoked about life, and they're like, well, I mean, I could, but it would be better to die with dignity. Maybe if I could become an old person, then I could die of old age. That would be more dignified. There might be some aches and pains and all of the pain of dying, but maybe I'd prefer that. So that makes me think of one element of the game that for sure I know we're going to have is time. The time is ticking. If you have an old person who wants to swap bodies with a young person, you need to find the young person that's a match as soon as possible before the time expires. And again, this is kind of dark, but it also works the same way. If there's a young person who would really like to become old, they also have kind of a ticking clock. How much of this life can they take? You better go find them a match before it's too late. There's tricky situations like what if we were talking about say a guy got a girl pregnant and now he's got a baby and he's in over his head because maybe this was a guy who wasn't really set up to be a provider. He doesn't really have it in him to go out there and make money and whatever. And he's like, oh no, I'm overwhelmed. Maybe he could find an old person to switch with, but maybe the older person, they don't have any money, but they maybe have a life insurance that will cash out when they die or something like that. I mean, you'd have to kind of contrive some scenarios like that because in terms of like finance and stuff, of course, we could always work something out. But for the sake of the game, we'd say, okay, but then like who does the woman marry to get the benefits? Does she marry the body of the old person who's going to die so she can like inherit or something? Or like, let's say the old person says, I don't really know how it would work, but there's all these tricky situations that you could come up with. 3-way swaps, this old lady would like to become a young lady, but the young lady wouldn't like to become an old lady, but maybe she might be okay being like a middle-aged man. So you'd have to find like a middle-aged man who could get into the swap, and you could have these multi-direction body swaps. And so this makes me think that it could also become kind of a puzzle game. Also, there's a puzzle aspect to it if you think about making deals, like the incentive, like, hey, I'll swap with you and I'll offer you such and such and such, right? So you have to find out what the counterparty would want and try to offer them the correct incentive to get them to make the deal, okay? So it can get complex. Hopefully you could get some kind of complex puzzle type situations. I was actually wanting to picture this more as like an arcade game where you're not thinking a whole lot. You're just kind of like maybe like a top-down view or whatever it is, running around just looking for bodies that can be swapped and swapping them. And every time you swap them, you get some gold pieces or some points or something. I like arcade game style kind of things, like an arcade puzzle game. Like Tetris is like an arcade puzzle game, so it's kind of fast-paced. There is certainly a time element to it and a hand-eye coordination element, but there's also a puzzle element. I was also picturing it sort of like a Stardew Valley sort of, or Zelda, like a top-down thing. I thought of Stardew Valley because I'm thinking about all the social interactions. So you have, or like a Grand Theft Auto even, right, with all the social interactions where you run around a town or a city and you open up contracts like, oh, here's somebody who wants to swap, but they need to be paired with, there needs to be a counterparty. And maybe you have like 6 or 7 or 15 open cases that have their own criteria and an expiring time limit, which could be a meter, but could also be like an hourglass with the sands falling through, since that's kind of like relevant to mortality. And you run around the city, exploring the city, being like, oh, all the old rich guys are at the golf course. So when I need one of those guys, maybe I can go make connections at the golf course. And it could be sort of almost kind of like a Grand Theft Auto sort of thing where you build up your connections in the world so you network and you can kind of, when you do good by this guy, then you get access to new areas of the world that you didn't have access to before. I also thought about the idea of if we're swapping bodies and becoming younger, you could do this multiple times. So you could have some people who really have the will to live so much that they've gone through 3 or 4 lifetimes, which is probably crazy. Nobody wants to be alive for 4 lifetimes, but some maniac out there wants to be alive for 4 lifetimes. And while they're doing this, they're acquiring all this power. They have all this knowledge, all these connections, all this wealth they've been putting away in different instruments. So maybe you have a couple of these guys, and now they become rivals because they're all about this will to live and acquiring power, and that keeps them wanting to live. Like never mind. They have this will to live, and they become rivals, and if you help out one of them, you might become enemies with another one. So you'll be handsomely rewarded for helping this guy swap bodies, but then his rival is going to, be following you around, causing hectic situations all of the time. So that's the basic premise for the game. And as far as game mechanics, that's something I'm working out because I don't want to be necessarily building something with really a lot of complex story and, custom gameplay scenarios and stuff. I'd like something that's a little more simple, a little more like an arcade-ish sort of thing, or even like a very, like, if you think of like roguelike games that maybe have a couple mechanics that come together and then it's procedurally generated. Something like that. A basic mechanic that I was thinking of is just speech bubbles. It also kind of reminds me of like Papers, Please, where it's all based on this interaction of like talking to people and looking at the documents. And I wouldn't make it quite as like Papers, Please. It's a little bit too slow paced because I like that arcade style. But if you run around and all you do is there's no really interaction, it's just like interact with this person and they just have one speech bubble that always pops up. And that speech bubble gives you some clues about their ranked preferences for someone they would like to swap bodies with if they're even interested, which most people probably wouldn't be. And you search and you find people's speech bubbles and you try to pair them up. And that gives you a pretty basic mechanic that could work. And then you could have lots of these like interesting story elements in the speech bubbles, but they wouldn't really affect the gameplay. They would just be like bonus type stuff, like listening to the radio in GTA. Or for some reason, Paperboy popped into my head. I don't think Paperboy has anything to do with it, but like I think in Paperboy, like, oh, these houses have these different kind of stories to the house, the way they look and whatever, but it really has nothing to do with the gameplay. It's just like a richer environment. So the speech bubbles would allow us to have like a richer environment for the game, but with a kind of a simple mechanic, which is try to figure out which people would be a good match. And then every time you match them, you gain resources, and anytime you mismatch, they decide, hey, we don't want to do this, and you lose resources. And if you do too many mismatches, then you lose the game, or you just kind of fail at the game, whatever will happen. So I have an idea for like a prototype that I could build. Because also I'm basically picturing building this on like Pico 8 or something, because that just seems cool. I like that. But for a prototype, let's make it just in a web browser, and maybe make a game called like Body Swap Alpha Swapper. So an Alpha Swapper, I'm thinking just get a bunch of headshots of people, you know, like Facebook profiles, celebrities, stock footage, whatever, get people's headshots and have them just floating all over like a website. And you would just have to scroll through the website and click on people's heads and see their speech bubble, and click on other people's heads and see their speech bubble. And when you see, well, you have to keep it in your head, the different criteria that you've seen. And then it's like a matching game. When you see somebody and you're like, oh, they would probably be a good match for that other person that I saw, you'd have to scroll back down and find the other one. Whatever the exact mechanic would be of like linking two people up, you'd have to remember, oh, this matches somebody else I saw who was looking for a match. Let me go find that person again, and then you're good to go. So I think that would be a cool kind of like, you know, alpha version of this, just to test out that gameplay mechanic and see if there's anything to it. And see if I discover any other like cool mechanics that could fit into the game. Anything else about how the game would work. Because all I really have is a stupid premise that's kind of depressing and kind of like dark. But I think it's funny. And I think it makes a point about life as well, which I like. You know, I think it's kind of poignant. Like, oh, these people want to die, or these people don't want to die. And we all have different levels of our will to live, which I guess would be one of the criteria that we'd want to check out. Like, maybe somebody's on the borderline, like they like living, but you could convince them they don't have that much will to live. You know, yeah, I like being alive, but with enough incentives, I might swap with somebody who only has 6 months or 5 years left to live. You know, I don't like to live that much, and other people have that strong will to live where they're going to hang on and live no matter what happens. So anyway, I'd like to take that premise and figure out if I could actually make a game. I don't know really much of anything about making games. You know, I'm not like a expert on video games, but we have this one idea for a mechanic, matching up priorities based on hints in the speech bubbles and then hoping for the best. And I'd like to build that right now because I'm pretty sure I could build that prototype in like an hour or something. It's like all I'd have to do to build it. The only thing that I'm not sure is just saying that object of the character, what would it actually look like to, what would the things be that would be their preferences, the criteria? And all we really need to do is say, okay, here's a potential swap, does it match your criteria? And if I could figure out that interaction of like, okay, how do I evaluate a potential swap? The rest of the game is just putting faces on a website and clicking on them, and that's, you know, get that done pretty quick. But I can't do it right now. I think I have to go fix my car. So soon, though, or maybe I'll just do it today anyway. We'll see what happens. But there you go. Body swap alpha, or body swap alpha swapper, body swap will to live. Oh, and I didn't even mention the zine. I want to make a zine out of it, of course. I thought the bigger game that's going to take more effort to build, I said, why don't I take a zine and have like each page be like a mock screenshot of the game, like concept art and then screenshots. And in the screenshot, I could explain everything that's going on. And every screenshot would be probably kind of like funny because it'd be like these weird scenarios of people trying to swap bodies. So I may be like way off in the wrong direction that nobody should be going. But, you know, it was just a conversation that, like many conversations I have with my friends, were like, all right, let's continue with this into some creative output, which is a good thing. At least we're being creative. So go be creative, and thanks for checking this out.